welcome to tonight's program for the Sturbridge Historical Society. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Sandy Gibson-Quinley. I'm the one you get all the emails from.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you all for coming. We appreciate that. Tonight, before we start tonight's program, I just want to do a couple of announcements. The next programs, April 25th, will be Sturbridge in the Civil War. And following that on May 23rd is World War II at the Public House. Both of them will be presented by Wally Percy, who does the Historical Society Facebook page and puts out a lot of information about local history. He's a collector, he does a lot of research, he's done a lot of good stuff. And I think both of those will be fun programs. In addition, I'd like to just again make an announcement to save the date for planning is going on for the Lafayette. Lafayette is returning. In 2024, he's redoing his 200-year anniversary, which was the 50th anniversary of his original, of the American Revolution. He came back 50 years later and did a tour of all of the states, and he was well received everywhere. You're talking about 3,000 people who showed up in Sturbridge. You're talking about hundreds of thousands of people who met him in Boston and New York. He was the rock star of the 1820s when he came. So he will be, the Friends of Lafayette are redoing his trip. And so on September 3rd, save your date, September 3rd, 6 o'clock, Lafayette will come up Charlton Street as he did before and go through the ceremonial arch and arrive at the car. And there's more planning going on. Sturbridge Village is will be doing various programs in the weekend before that. That's Labor Day weekend. That is also, by the way, September 3rd is going to be Massachusetts primary day, state primary day. So go out and vote and then come join us on the common. I would also like to make a call for planning. We need to begin. We've done some planning for next year. We have a good planning group. I'd like to invite any of you who are interested in helping us plan to just talk to me before you leave so that I have your name, and we will be setting up a meeting sometime between now and the end of April to begin planning. We also this planning group, I would like to start talking about reinstating a board of trustees. We are supposed to have a board that is according to our original charter. We don't at the moment. I'm not sure how long we haven't had one, but we probably should. We begin to act like, go back to acting like a real nonprofit historical society. So if any of you are interested in pursuing that or talking to us about it or just thinking about it, give me a name, please, before we head out today. All right, tonight's program is called Gibbs Tiffany & Company, the Sturbridge manufacturer of New England underhammer pocket pistols. Now, I don't know, maybe some of you are better at knowing your guns than I am. My husband, who is one of the presenters, has a collection of guns, and the discussion always is, I have no idea. He will say, oh, well, that's there's the reproduction in my gun closet. There's the reproduction something, and then there's the original such and such. And it's like, I have no idea. Okay? But the underhammer pistols I have heard about for a number of years, and have met with, seen Charlie and Bob meet at our house, and so I have some idea of underhammer pistols and their importance to Sturbridge. And I think you will find this very enjoyable this evening. Presenters tonight are Bob Arnold, freelance photographer, amateur historian, and avid collector of all things Sturbridge, and many other things, I would say. In addition to serving his clients throughout New England, Bob has been documenting life in our community since he and his family moved here in 1970. His work over the past 50 years has yielded a unique perspective on commercial, cultural, and environmental changes in our community, and we are really honored to have him share his knowledge. Also presenting this evening is Charlie Blanchard, who after joining CPC Engineering in 1971, he and his family moved to Sturbridge in '73. Following the example set by CPC's founders, Lloyd Pope and Charlie Ciffoni, he served the community on the Water Sewer Commission for 16 years, the Board of Selectmen for 18 years, and is currently serving on the Planning Board. I would assume most of you have heard of or know Charlie. He's a founding member of the Sturbridge Historical Society and has served as its treasurer since its inception. Thank you, Charlie, for that. He's a very good treasurer. Doug Quigley has lived in Sturbridge for over 45 years, coming here to work as an interpreter at Old Sturbridge Village. Since he was a teenager, probably even earlier, I would say, if you could remember when David Crockett came on TV with Disney, that's probably one of the starting points of his interest. But since he was a teen, he's participated in living history events covering the Revolutionary War, the federal period, and the American Civil War. He's a reenactor. He's collected both original and reproduction firearms that were used in the formation of the country. He is currently president of the Historical Society. They're all, Bob, Charlie, and Doug are all collectors of underhammer pistols and have all been very interested in Gibbs Tiffany. I know this because I've lived it. Not my thing, but it's their thing, and I'm not interested. But anyways, I would like you to welcome this evening Bob, Charlie, and Doug.
Thank you very much, Sandy, and welcome everyone this evening. I'll give a little introduction, and then Doug and Bob will be making a presentation on the actual guns and information on them themselves. So tonight's presentation, as Sandy said, is on underhammer guns and the role Sturbridge played in the manufacturing of these guns from 1833 until 1838. The Industrial Revolution had barely begun when in 1826, Fordyce Ruggles of Hardwick, Mass. was awarded the first U.S. patent for a percussion gun. It was a uniquely American design that could be made by any competent mechanic, not just professional gun makers. Ruggles-style guns were simple and sturdy, a triumph of Yankee ingenuity that included many firsts, including the first use of cast steel for the gun barrels. At a time when most guns for sale in America were European imports, the underhammer gave American manufacturers a reliable product that they could offer at a lower cost than their overseas rivals. These guns are also prime examples of provincial New England artistry, with distinctive styles of woodworking, engraving, and silver wire inlay that will immediately be familiar to any enthusiast of early American decorative art. Unfortunately, Fordyce Ruggles died in February 1828 from an accidental shooting with one of his pistols, but his brother Aidan continued on with the business, moving it from Hardwick to Stafford, Connecticut in 1829. In November 1833, the unthinkable occurred, and Aidan, like his brother, Fordyce, was accidentally shot and killed by one of his guns. At about the same time Aidan Ruggles died, Enoch K. Gibbs and Lucian Tiffany, both natives of Sturbridge, formed the firm Gibbs, Tiffany and Company and began the manufacture of underhammer guns in Westville. It's not known whether they bought the rights to produce the Ruggles pistols in Massachusetts or simply copied the design after Aidan Ruggles' death, although it's clear that plans were in place to begin the business before his death. Gibbs and Tiffany moved their shop from Westville to Sturbridge Center in 1837 at a site on Hobbs Brook where David K. Porter had built a dam and a shop. There were several other manufacturers of these guns, 6 in Stafford, Connecticut, 7 in Weston, Connecticut, 5 in Southbridge, and 1 in Westfield, Mass. But Gibbs, Tiffany and Company was among the largest. State trade records from 1837 indicate that Gibbs and Tiffany then in their factory on Hobbs Brook near Pistol Pond, employed 36 hands and produced guns valued at over $20,000, the equivalent of $650,000 in today's dollars. Lucian Tiffany left the company in 1837, and the company ceased operations in 1838. As a matter of fact, most of the under him manufacturers seemed to stop business around that time, around 1838. So with that brief introduction, I'll turn it over to Doug, and Doug will have more information.
All right, I want to make sure everybody can hear. We've been mentioning Pistol Pond. Everybody know where Pistol Pond is? You know, the big pond next to Cracker Barrel on Route 20, you see it? That's Pistol Pond. So it's on that pond that this factory stood in the 1830s. Anyway, in order to understand the impact and the influence and the inventiveness of the Gibbs Tiffany and the Underhammer, I'm going to give you a little background on firearms, so bear with me. The earliest weapons of mankind was spears, bow and arrows, and pikes and swords. The big change occurred in the 14th century when the Chinese invented gunpowder. That changed everything, because now we could conduct warfare and hunting from great distance and we could throw something. And of course, gunpowder is made with sulfur, charcoal, and saltpeter. Once that invention came, how to ignite a firearm became the challenge. And the earliest ignition systems would just simply drill a hole in the end of the barrel, pour gunpowder in it, and put a torch to it. Because you have to ignite the gunpowder, you have to make it go off. Later on, as they kept advancing, there was a system of a lit fuse held by a hammer. Same thing, you had to hit a hole drilled in the barrel, and you had a little pan on the outside attached to it. You could put some gunpowder. So all you got to do is get a spark to that pan, and the gun will go off. So by having a lit fuse, almost like a lit cigarette in the hammer, by pulling the trigger, that came down into the pan, ignited the powder, went through that little hole, and the gun went off. That was called a matchlock. And just in terms of historical references, the Plymouth Pilgrims in 1620 had matchlocks. The Jamestown settlements in 1607 had matchlocks. Meanwhile, the French were working and discovered that a flint and steel creates a spark, as it had for probably 1,000 years beforehand. And they worked at getting it onto a firearm. So by the 1700s, they had perfected, the French had perfected the flintlock. Let's see if we can do this here. There we go. So the flintlock was in use for about 140 years. Every army in the world had them through the 1600s and into the 1700s. The American Revolution was fought with flintlocks, both the British and the Americans. Great improvement over the matchlock, because you didn't have to carry a lit fuse around with you all the time. By simply using the flint and steel, you can create a spark and make the gun go off. I'm just getting used to all this. So that's a flintlock, close-up of the flintlock. That brass is a pan that's clamped to the side of the barrel. This piece of steel is called a frizzen, and it's held in place by that little spring there. And this is the hammer or the cock. It looks like a little vise, and it's holding a piece of flint. That's a gray stone that, when struck against that steel, will create a spark. So just looking at the outside, you can see there's 7 or 8 moving parts that had to be manufactured, fitted, and be able to operate. So it was a pretty complicated system. That's just the outside. Okay, there's the inside of the flintlock. Again, you can see that brass pan that would hold the gunpowder right up against the barrel of the gun that had a little hole, probably the size of the lead part of a pencil, that went into the main charge. But you also have pretty sophisticated a mainspring, a tumbler, a sear spring. All these parts had to be manufactured, fitted, so that they could function and make the gun go off. So it wasn't something a farmer could make in his backyard. It required some skill, steel with metal, and then to put them all together. But again, it was a great improvement over the matchlock. So we're going to show the sequence of how the flint went off. So again, there's the flint being held in the claws. There's the piece of steel called the frizzen, and it's closed shut. There's gunpowder in that brass pan. So when the trigger is pulled, that copper hammer advances forward. See how it's touching that shield, or that frizzen? And as it's doing that, it's scraping down little pieces of steel in the form of a spark. And it's going directly into that pan. You see that little hole right there? There's a little round hole. That drilled right into the side of the barrel. And if this powder goes off in this pan, it's going to throw a spark through that hole and make the gun go off. So there you go. You see the sparks starting this. The sparks that came off that frizzen by being struck by the flint is now creating sparks, and that powder that we put in the pan is now beginning to be ignited. Again, it continues to flame up. You get the smoke occurring. And there's the flame. You have an open flame, and where's that fire going? But it's going through that channel, igniting the main powder that we poured down the barrel, and it's making the gun go off. It sounds like a lot. The hammer comes down, strikes, pushes the steel. You have sparks coming down. The pan has to lift up. Ignition. It has to go through the hole. But it happens like that. You probably in like less than a second. Great, much more efficient again over a matchlock. You can't shoot in the rain. The flint has to be sharp. You always have to have a good spark. But compared to the previous innovations, it was great. Let's see. In 1820, the percussion lock was invented. So what the percussion lock did, it was a whole new system of ignition. So you see the pistol, the firearm is pretty much the same. You still have a lock on it, but you're missing all that frizzen spring, the hammer, the claw holding the flint. What you have is a modern-looking hammer, and underneath it is a little nipple, I think we would describe it as welded right into the side of the barrel. And what you had invented in the 1820s was a percussion cap. It was a little brass cap that had a fulminate mercury, a little element of chemical, just like a drop or two on it. And when it was impacted with two sharp surfaces, it would throw a spark. So by putting a percussion cap on that little nipple and having a hammer come down and drive it, it's going to throw a spark, and the only place it can go is through this control channel to ignite the main charge. So unlike the flintlock, it's got a lot less moving parts. You can fire it in the rain, and it goes off every time. So a big improvement. And that was a percussion cap, invented pretty much about 1820. Again, there's a close-up. If you make out that nipple, you can see where the hammer comes down. And no open flames, no other place for the flame to go except through the channel and into the main bore of the gun. That's what a percussion cap looks like. And you can see how big it is on a person's thumb. They're very small, and inside that cap is this chemical that will throw a spark when it's hit with the hammer. There's a variety of them. These two over here are larger musket caps. Those would be used on military muskets at the time. And even though the percussion cap was invented in 1820, and these underhammer pistols, which percussions were made in the 1830s, the first U.S. Army weapon to have a percussion cap was the 1842. So, I mean, other than pistols, their standard infantry weapon didn't come until 1842. But that's the percussion cap. So by comparison, here's a picture of an underhammer. So some of the novelty is, first of all, they're using a brand new ignition system. The percussion cap is pretty much new to be around. So for them to be using it and applying it to their instrument that they're making is pretty creative. And also, if you notice, there's no hammer, there's no frizzen, there's no parts except a trigger and a hammer. So this is a percussion cap, but as you can tell, the hammer and the ignition is not up on the top, it's underneath. That's why it's called an underhammer. The hammer of the gun is on the underside of the barrel. And the simplicity of it, just look at it, you don't have a trigger guard, you have nothing up on top. All you see there is the hammer, which is cocked and pulled, and the trigger, which is pulled and make it go off. This is the top view of an underhammer pistol. You can see it's made by Gibbs Tiffany in Sturbridge, Mass. But this picture shows it without the wood, without the grip. So you can see what's inside is just really two pieces, the main spring, and that's it. the main spring, which, and that small one on the top is for the trigger. So compared to the other one, which had 8 or 9 moving parts, this is very much reduced, very simplified. So you have the hammer, the trigger, and the spring. And pretty much that's it. So to produce one of these required a lot less skill, a lot less material. They were small, lightweight. Let's see if we got, oh, there's a side view of it. Again, this is without the wooden grip, which covers all that. But that's what's inside. And compared to what we saw the inside of the flint and the percussion, where you had 8 or 10 bridles and tumblers and sear springs and main springs, this was simple, efficient, inexpensive, and it could be made by relatively unskilled workers. You didn't need a trained gunsmith expert to make one of these. So with that, I'll let Bob take over and discuss more of the form and style of the underhammer. But again, what's important is they were coming out with the percussion lock, which was brand new in terms of technology. And the gun was so differently designed. Remember that first flintlock was sort of heavy pistol with the barrel on the lock and all the inside pieces, all the moving parts. This is the most simple, elegant form you can imagine, and that's what made it very desirable. It was inexpensive to buy, it was easy to use, and relatively easy to manufacture. So we'll talk about the manufacturing.
Doug. This little gun was manufactured in Sturbridge by Gibbs Tiffany in the 1830s. Its form, as Doug has pointed out, is very simple, very easy to use, and in general, this form is described today as the New England boot pistol or the pocket rifle. This little gun features about a 3.5-inch barrel that is octagoned around with what's termed a wedding band transition. It does have sights, rudimentary at best. Obviously, these guns were made for close-in use rather than long-distance shooting. The grip is a one-piece wood grip bound by a brass backstrap, secured by a single screw that screws into the frame of the gun. Now, this particular gun I've taken apart in the case up here so you can see actually how they go together. The top strap is engraved or stamped with the manufacturer's name, Gibbs Tiffany in Sturbridge, Mass., and the decorative eagle that you often find on New England underhammers. The barrel is also stamped with information. It references E. Hutchings and Company agents in Baltimore, and Hutchings was basically a wholesale buyer of Gibbs Tiffany underhammers, as well as other underhammers from many of the other manufacturers here in New England. This is a Ruggles, and as you can see, it's a spitting image of the Gibbs Tiffany we just looked at. The same configuration, barrel configuration, same configuration of the grip, but this was made after Ruggles had moved his workshop down to Stafford, Connecticut. And again, you can see the reference to E. Hutchings and Company, so they obviously handled Ruggles firearms as well. Now, it's not. I guess we can be assured that the Ruggles came first rather than the Gibbs Tiffany, because he established his shop in Stafford in 1829, I think? And we don't know whether it was a matter of copying each other or if it was actually the Gibbs Tiffany licensed the design from Ruggles, but a lot of their weapons are very, very similar, if not almost identical. This is another Gibbs Tiffany with a longer barrel and an interesting kind of a different grip configuration. It's almost at right angles to the barrel. Same configuration, same markings, Gibbs Tiffany markings on the back strap, on the top strap, and again, E. Hutchings markings on the barrel. Andrus and Osborne were based in Canton, Connecticut. They made beautiful weapons. The fit and finish on the Andrus and Osborne weapons is beautiful. And this one features a German silver inlay panel here for whatever reason, I don't know. I assume maybe to have the owner engrave their name on it, perhaps. And these are marked again on the top strap with the eagle, Andrus and Osborne, Canton, Connecticut. William Ashton was based in Middletown, Connecticut. And he made the same, obviously roughly the same design, but it's a little more robust. The grip is kind of clunky. Excuse me. It's kind of a heavy duty approach. And he chose to mark his guns on the top of the barrel with simple initials, WA, with Middletown, Connecticut underneath. Now, just as a point of information, all of these guns are in the case up here. You're welcome to come up and look at them afterwards. H.J. Hale was in Bristol, Connecticut, and this is an interesting little gun. It's only about that long, and I assume that they made this bulbous grip so that the gun would be easier to hold on to if it was fired. I think it would be difficult if it had that typical slender grip. Being such a small gun, it might be hard to control if you did fire it. Again, top strap marked, H.J. Hale, with a rather crude decoration as well. Now, the guns we've looked at, despite the fact that they have different barrel lengths and grip configurations and ornamentation, inside, the guts, the works of them are essentially the same. And this goes back to what I said previously about, we don't know whether this was contracted by licensing, or it was just copying, or it was industrial espionage, or something like that. But if you look, if you look, you have basically two moving parts. You have a trigger and a hammer, and a mainspring, and a spring for the hammer, for the trigger. And the designs are almost identical. So now that we've looked at guns that look almost the same, we're going to look at a few different ones. There are variations on a theme here for underhammers. E.K. Putney was a rather obscure manufacturer in Sturbridge. And this gun has a long octagon barrel, very heavy barrel. It's not the conventional octagon to round configuration. But it features also a lunate hammer here, which is typical of the early hammers that Ruggles made when he was still up in Hardwick. So this gun is kind of a throwback. The top strap is engraved with a rather well done floral or feather motif rather than the manufacturer's name. And Putney chose to stamp his guns with his name underneath the barrel. And unfortunately, it's very near the nipple, so there's a significant amount of corrosion from firing. But you can still make out EK, PUT, and the beginnings of an N there, so it's definitely a Putney. Now, I wanted to fire the Putney, and we did end up firing it. I wasn't sure it would fire because the mainspring was pretty weak, but obviously it did fire. But it was interesting to note in this photograph that the back pressure through the nipple caused the hammer to come back into almost a completely recocked position. And nobody noticed that until we looked at the photographs. This little gun is by an unknown maker, I think from Pennsylvania area. And the first thing you notice is not only that it's an underhammer, but that it has a trigger guard. And none of the other guns that we've looked at has had a trigger guard. And the really unique thing about this gun is that the trigger guard is actually the mainspring for the hammer. So that when it's cocked, the trigger guard goes under tension, and when you pull the trigger, when you release the sear here, the trigger guard then releases its tension and the hammer fires. Unique design. This is a modern underhammer made by a fellow down in Texas by the name of Wade Ingram. He was a very, very accomplished machinist whose hobby was to make underhammers, both pistols and rifles, target rifles. And it's a similar design. Obviously, it reflects the New England boot pistol design, but he used instead of using a single wood piece grip, he used two pieces of wood, and they're both screwed in onto a skeletal brass frame that runs the entire length of the grips. Very stable design, and also the other change you see is that he used a coil spring for the mainspring. Kind of a unique design. Works beautifully, by the way. Another unknown manufacturer of an elegant little gun that has a checkered grip and again a German silver inlay. Excuse me. And this is finally done right down to the tips of the hammer and the trigger are rolled over to make them easier to use. This gun illustrates an issue, though, that was common in underhammers in that because of the angle of the grip and the recoil of the pistol, the grips very often broke. They either broke along the grain or here at the wrist. That's why in today's market, when you see underhammers that are for sale or at auction, it's not uncommon to see grips that are broken or repaired. Actually, Ruggles, in the early days up in Hardwick, actually experimented with a metal gripped gun. Perhaps he recognized the issue, but for whatever reason, that gun never really came to market. However, over in Rhode Island, a fellow by the name of Bosworth, he came up with a solution. And he made his entire gun out of brass and steel. It's heavy, let me tell you. It really is. And it did solve the problem, obviously, of the broken grips. And in addition, he put a patch box in a spring-loaded patch box in his grips, so you had your essentials for your next shot literally at hand. And the other advantage to the Bosworth too was that if you missed your shot, you could simply throw this heavy metal object at your throat and be done with it. Ethan Allen made guns over in Grafton, Mass. Again, following a similar design. His guns were, as you can see here, Ethan Allen, Grafton, Mass. But he actually marketed his as pocket rifle. That was his name for his guns. And he had a distributor, as Gibbs Tiffany and Ruggles did, but it was an outfit called Spies in New York. And what Spies did was they actually rebranded a lot of Ethan Allen's guns and marketed them as Mississippi pocket rifle. For whatever reason, maybe something to do with the frontier or something, but theirs was a Mississippi pocket rifle. But they were in fact Ethan Allen's pocket rifles. Now he solved the issue of the broken grips by simply extending some of the frame of the gun down in front of the wooden grip, and that helped absorb some of the recoil, so you didn't have that issue. His guns were very successful. Now, we've talked about handguns here exclusively, but many manufacturers of underhammers here in New England made absolutely beautiful long guns, and they were generally described as buggy rifles. They were very popular with the target shooting group because of the heavy, very heavy, finely made barrels. And this particular one was made in Sturbridge in the 1830s, and it features a very nicely inlaid brass patch box in the stock, still maintaining the simple underhammer design with two moving parts, but having a very, as I said, very heavy octagoned around barrel. And this one is marked just E. Gibbs and Company, Sturbridge, Mass. So it was obviously made after Tiffany had left the company. So I think, Charlie, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this dates it to probably late 1837 to 1838. A very tight window there. And Gibbs was so proud of his rifles that he wrote to his cousin in 1836 in Boston regarding a rifle that he had sent via stage to his cousin. It says, if after shooting it you like it well enough, you can have it for 16, although I have been offered 17 in hand. It is said to be the greatest shooter ever used in Sturbridge. Shot 9 times into a cent mark out of 11. Try and beat it if you can. That's quite a good sales pitch. I'll close, before turning it back over to Charlie, I'll close with one more Gibbs Tiffany related artifact. And this is a large cent, US cent, 1816, that somebody, presumably in 1836, counterstamped with all the pertinent information you see on underhammer, on the Gibbs Tiffany underhammers. The eagle, the reference to Hutchings and Company, Gibbs Tiffany and Company, Sturbridge, the cast steel stamp, and 1836. Why they were made, or who made them, or how many were made, we have no idea. They're just a unique item. And very rare. I have tracked this particular one for probably 20 years or more through auctions. And the last time it sold was in 2020. And it sold for $700. That's a pretty expensive penny. So Charlie, I'm going to turn it back over to you, and Charlie's going to give us some additional information on the two principals, Mr. Gibbs and Mr. Tiffany. Thank you.
Yeah, so it might be interesting to find out here about what happened to Gibbs and Tiffany after they left Sturbridge. So Lucian Tiffany lived from 1812 to 1901. He was born in Southbridge or Sturbridge. We're not sure of the record. One said Sturbridge, one said Southbridge. But regardless, he attended the common schools and was trained to be a machinist. He moved to Hartford after leaving Gibbs and Tiffany in 1837 and worked several years for Woodruff and Beech's Foundry and later at Case Tiffany and Company. He was also in business for himself under the name of L. Tiffany and Company, and he died in Hartford on September 5th, 1901. Enoch Gibbs lived from 1811 to 1899. He was born in Sturbridge, attended the common schools, and in 1829, his family had been farmers in Sturbridge. He moved to a section of Lancaster, Massachusetts, known as Factory Village, to work as a comb maker. And he actually returned to Sturbridge in 1833 to begin the manufacture of the guns with his partner, Lucian Tiffany. In 1838, he returned to Lancaster, again working in the comb business. In 1846, he became a constable, and in 1850, after Factory Village was incorporated as the town of Clinton, he was appointed a deputy sheriff of Worcester County, a position that he held for 39 years. He was an incorporator of the First National Bank of Clinton and one of the first members of the Congregational Church in that town. He was appointed postmaster by President Lincoln in 1864, serving for 9 years. From his youth, he was called a sturdy foe of intemperance and the sale of intoxicants, and was very active in the temperance society. His obituary noted that he was one of our oldest and best known. Now the last slide is interesting. This is from the 1850 state census of Clinton, Massachusetts, and you note at the top, it's signed by Enoch Gibbs as assistant marshal. And one interesting thing about this is that this census shows my second great grandparents, James Burke, who came from Galway in 1849, and Ann Burke, who arrived in 1850, July 1850. They're listed in this census as tenants in separate boarding houses with other Irish immigrants. They were married in Clinton in 1851. Another interesting thing, the 1880 census shows that 3 of their children, Thomas, age 25, Patrick, age 18, and William, age 16, working as comb makers. So kind of a small world that kind of got together. So that's it. That's sort of summarizes it. I'm sure we have time for some questions.
Yeah, we'll take questions for a few minutes, and then as we said, there's a couple of, all these pistols that were photographed are on display over there. Please go over and answer any questions you have.
All of these pocket pistols that were made under the same basic pattern. What caliber were those? They were probably all the same caliber also, right?
They varied, generally around a 30 caliber.
And were they rifle barrels?
Some were rifled. There was at least a half a dozen different kinds of rifling. Some were like just hexagonal, some were large lands, some were very small lands.
So the patterns weren't exactly the same.
No, not exactly, no. But generally around a
30, 31
30 caliber-ish, yeah.
There was a big fire in Washington, D.C., and it burned the patent office. I think it was like 1826. So many of these early patents were lost, and that's why we don't know exactly what they said and who could copy them. And once the fire, maybe that's why they started copying them. But
Right.
that was
You guys actually shot something that was pistol,
Bob
so
shot
you had to mic the barrels to get the patch and ball in there correctly.
I never shot them with a ball. I didn't trust the metal, so I just shot them with a
Speaking of that patent that Doug just mentioned, a lot of this information comes from a book by Nick Chandler, who really did a lot of research on underhammer pistols in New England here. And one of the things he mentions during this is that after Aiden's death, his wife and a partner worked quite a bit in trying to re-secure the rights to those patents. And I think it might have been something to do with the idea that they did want to try to get more license fees for the people who were actually using that patent.
Yes, sir. Couple of questions. Did the people back in those days that were making the barrels, did they have a blacksmith background, or did they have machinery back then that could turn those out? Or how did it work?
Yeah, they had machinery that could turn the barrels. Yes, absolutely.
And the same thing, I'm just thinking about if you have that wooden piece that has to go on to the barrel, that looked like it had to be very finely done. Was that a matter of machinery, or did someone carve it up? Or would you know even?
I don't know, but I would assume there would be a method of roughing them out and then fitting to each gun, I would assume. But I don't know exactly.
Pretty interesting.
It is. And then on some of the underhammers, you see the brass back strap that comes up. That had to be fitted as well.
Without a guard, could you accidentally put a hammer on a cock, fire it off? Because it's run out of cap, as it not.
Good point.
And I wonder if the original owners.
Good. I think they were incredibly dangerous.
Yeah, along that line also, there's some Quebec historical leaflets, and Charles Corey has written several, and one of the ones he mentions is that when he went out west, he did carry with him one of these Gibbs Tiffany underhammer pistols, and he pointed out that very danger that you mentioned, that it could go off, and he left it out there because he thought it was just too dangerous to carry.
Well, didn't the brothers both get killed by?
Yeah.
Not
Yeah,
just
they did,
Tiffany,
but-
Ruggles brother.
But
Oh,
both of them did.
yeah.
Unfortunately, well, it was accidental, but it wasn't from like a misfiring of the gun itself. In one case, somebody had been testing a rifle, a pocket rifle, as Fordyce turned around the corner and the ball hit him and killed him. In Aiden's case, he had been target shooting a gun, I believe, and he was at a tavern, and the gun had been on the table next to him. And a younger person came over and actually picked up the gun, cocked it, the ball went off and struck Aiden in the head and killed him.
The other interesting thing about the underhammers, as extraordinary as they are, beautiful as they are, they're only made for like a 20-year period. They appeared out of nowhere with the Ruggles, and by the 1840s, it was gone. They weren't being produced. And it could be for a number of reasons. There was a number of recessions and panics at that time that might have ruined some businesses. Colt was exploding with his productions of cartridge pistols as well as rifles. So for a number of reasons, for whatever, they just disappeared. They disappeared almost as fast as they appeared. So it was a very short time that these underhammer pistols were made. Yes, sir.
Short answer, no, but we do have the figures from Barbara's book about Gibbs Tiffany.
Yeah, I think they were talking about that $20,000 worth. I think it was selling the gun for roughly $5 or something.
Yeah,
That was
yeah.
an estimate, I think.
Yeah, well, that letter from Gibbs quotes as $16 for the buddy rifle. So yeah, they were making a lot of guns.
Was it really kind of a personal defense weapon?
I think mostly, it's not something, because of the short barrel and the light convenience, you can put it in your pocket, put it in whatever, and go out west with them. I don't think people in town would carry it around going into the tavern, but you were heading to Ohio or that's why Hutchison in Baltimore, he was selling left and right because people were going west from the DC, Baltimore area, canals, or whatever. So I think it was mostly an inexpensive personal defense weapon that you put in your pocket and take west and not shoot yourself.
You just walk through the steps to, mechanics to load it and shoot it.
Well, first thing you do is you, with any muzzle loader, you have to charge the barrel with gunpowder. So you pour the gunpowder in, and then you could take your ball and an appropriate thickness wad and jam that in, and then you would cock the hammer and put the cap, the percussion cap on the nipple, and you were ready to go.
One thing that's
So
not,
it wasn't just a matter of like putting a cartridge in. It was pretty involved.
so you had to carry the ball separate.
Right.
Over there, I have a power cord and flats that was common. And what's interesting with all these pistols, you don't see the ramrod. So I don't know if they came
Exactly, yeah.
separate or you had to just use something on your own. But you know, most muzzle loaders, they have a ramrod underneath it. You push it down, and none of these guns have. I think the rifle does.
Yeah, the
rifle does. All these pistols, they don't have it.
Yeah, one of the other interesting things about, was noted in that Chandler book, was that it's indicated that they most likely sold a lot of these pocket rifles in pairs. So you would buy two at a time for whatever reason, they could just have one pocket and have the other one ready to go.
Yes, sir.
You gotta rely that gravity wouldn't just drop the cap off the nipple while you're cocking it and getting ready to shoot.
That's exactly right.
So
You notice all those percussion caps, they were kind of,
Yeah.
They were quite around the edge.
so they would fit tight. And if you notice that, remember that picture I pointed to the musket ones, they had like a little ledge around the side, and they were split partway up for that very reason. So once you fired it, they blew off partway so you can remove them real quick. Sometimes, you know, I had a percussion rifle that took to get, and I sometimes had to get a screwdriver, a knife, and pry it off because when a hammer hit it in there, it might just wedge in there. So I think they fit tight to begin with, which made it more difficult to take them off.
I've had to fall off the nipple when the nipple's pointing up and they're sitting down.
Right.
Imagine with their feet underneath.
Exactly. So you carry it uncocked so the hammer's sitting on the nipple already. So all you got to do is bump it and it might go off. Or do you carry it full cock with a no trigger guard?
One thing I found when I was firing these was that if you had a gun that had a nipple that was really worn, you just had to squeeze the cap a little bit, just kind of pinch it a little, and that would hold it on the nipple.
Read that, Mark.
Yeah. The barrels were kept, you're saying. So would you use just one hand or would you use two to fire?
Fire.
And it just seems like it's designed to, not shoot straight,
Well,
but shoot down. Because if the barrel is heavy,
You don't
it's
know,
kind
you
of
don't
hard.
know.
And the handle, where they handle it, it just isn't on the clean.
It's not on you with two hands there.
Is that the case? You can shoot it with one hand, or does it get heavy?
I would assume you would shoot it with one hand unless you were target shooting perhaps and you'd use a two-handed posture. But generally, I think one hand.
They aren't heavy. I mean, some of these are 3-inch barrels, so when you come up and look at them, they're really small. So there's not a lot of weight to them, as opposed to those first two, the flintlock pistol and the percussion pistol. Those weighed like 5 pounds or 4 pounds. They were heavy, so that's a totally different league than these small, simple underhandles.
Hey Doug, as a metal worker, I think one of the interesting things of this gun is they were using something called cast steel.
Yes.
Which is a brand new steel on the market. It's not poured in a mold. It's actually a crucible steel. So it's a great selling point if you have a gun that is not made out of the old wrought iron, which could blow up if overloaded, but it's a cast steel. So that was a selling point for that particular weapon.
And you got a point to stamp it so that people know it.
Yes.
But the hammers are made out of cast iron.
Yep.
And how many of you have seen that are broken because cast iron's brittle?
You're
So
absolutely
they did
right.
utilize that. But the cast steel thing was something that was being a selling point.
Thank you for pointing that out, Bob. That's important. It really is.
Yes, sir.
What do you think caused there to be so many manufacturers in this one small area of New England? Was it the manufacturing capabilities or?
I think a skilled labor force,
Skilled labor
you know, New England.
Well, partially still.
Right.
Yeah, that is a good question.
Well, also, from what we've seen of Hudson's company, the other agents that did this, there seemed to be quite a bit of a demand for these things. So I think the market was there, and so people would have the ability to set up a little shop and do this. One of the things that's also mentioned in that book by Nick Chandler is that there's a thought that, particularly in the larger shops such as Ruggles, gun makers, would work there and put their own names on guns they were making there. They maybe make some for Ruggles, and then they have an opportunity to make a half dozen or so for themselves and put their name on it. So that's another thing that's mentioned there. One other thing about this is that Old Sturbridge Village Gun Shop does have a nice section on these underhammer guns. It gives a little example of what the workshop would have looked like. So it's kind of interesting if you ever get to go there.
I would say that one reason why it might be particular to this area is the armor. As you said, skilled labor force. The Springfield Armory is just down the road, and they were making guns.
True, that's true. Yeah, right.
Along the Connecticut River, there was a major manufacturer, Springfield. Two questions. One, with your finger underneath the barrel and the spark from the cap going off there, I imagine there's a good chance your finger's going to get burned. None of the cap sparks anywhere outside.
Generally, the hammer was sort of cup shaped, so that would contain it. Yeah.
Well, these are all probably individually made, didn't have interchangeable parts.
Correct.
Each one was machined for
Correct.
that gun, as opposed to when you might Colt and Smith and Wesson started with the interchangeable
Right.
parts in the later 1800s.
Right, Eli Whitney, I think, began that
Yeah.
system down in the middle.
And that changed the whole industry.
What's the value today on the market for the gun in the spring?
Well, that varies.
How much you want to give us?
It depends on condition and the manufacturer, of course. A rough condition Gibbs Tiffany might go for 300, 400, perhaps. A really good one, or one of the lesser known manufacturers might go for 700, 800, or a little more. But that's an interesting question, because just looking through auction records, getting ready for this presentation, I found a Ruggles that was not an early Ruggles, but a Ruggles that was made in Connecticut, sold for $4,800 about 10 years ago.
Yeah, I was just going to add an interesting fact with going west, and everybody had guns, whether these were easy to take or not, but they were also very dangerous. That I have read that as many people, I mean, we're all the same age. We all grew up with, wagon train and whatever. And we're always worried about the Indians. It wasn't the Indians that killed all the people. That many of them died by accidental gunshots because they weren't used to having guns, and that was really, in addition to disease, etc., that it was these accidental uses of guns that, fired incorrectly or whatever, that caused a certain amount of deaths on, going west, with the people traveling west.
Anything else?
Yeah.
Otherwise,
You got it.
Thank you all.
A full wooden stock, but when you ram it, you break the stock, so they change it to traditional stock. And I have an unbroken stock for $200 so far. The least we're buying, I get the blast. Yeah, I got a range on back.
Still working for it?
Oh, no, that's fine. Yep. For money, I have a quick question.
yes.
Great presentation.
Thank you.
I just wanted to ask.
Let me take my Leatherman out of there.
Get that out of there.
Well, I learned a lot. I never even knew there was such a thing as under Howard. No, neither, and I loves to hound them.
Yep. They're fascinating.
Where are you finding them?
Yeah, all over. They're not common. They're pretty scarce.
Very cool.
This is the one that had the trigger guard. That is the mainspring. See, when you see how this goes under tension when you do that, and then when you release it, the spring releases.
Now you just have to figure out what they used for ramrods.
Exactly. That's a question I've always wondered.
It never looked good to me. Wait, how do you load it?
That's what you see in Windsor, Vermont.
What's the gadget for receiving?
Windsor, Vermont. And it was equivalent to 45 cents. And this is 1850.
Right.
It was made in Chicopee, Mass.
The machine.
The machine.
Really? Wow. Yeah, Windsor Locks, they got a contract. They made Civil War muskets. They look just like an Enfield, though. And I had one. I bought one the weekend of I got married. But I sold it. Somebody wanted to buy it. Anyway. Yeah. No, that's a great museum up there.
Yes, it is.
They've
got a lot of very old equipment.
Yeah.